Welcome everyone to Things Around 8. Dear friends, in this video we will talk about the recent statements by General Roland Walker, the new head of the British Army, who said that his country and Europe as a whole need to be ready for war in 3 years. And how European countries are preparing for this. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and turn on the notification bells so you don't miss any news. On Tuesday, July 23rd, General Roland Walker, the new head of the British Army, said that England is facing a major threat that also extends to the whole of Europe. A threat that, for General Walker, is represented by Russia. The new head of the British Army said that based on the analysis of the conflict in Ukraine, the Russian armed forces are suffering a very deep deterioration, which will affect Russia's operational capacity for many years. But he stressed that if Putin wins the war, the resources he will obtain from Ukraine, both in terms of raw materials and in terms of manpower and soldiers, could be enough to rebuild part of what was lost in the war. General Walker predicts that in 3, at most 4 years, after a Russian victory in Ukraine, Putin will once again have sufficient means to take revenge on Europe and all the support that many European countries have given Ukraine. The British general also mentioned the formation of an anti-European and anti-Western axis formed by Russia, China, Iran and North Korea, referring to the security pact that Putin signed with Kim Jong-un, seen by many as a genuine military alliance, and Iran's efforts to obtain nuclear weapons, promising to plunge the Middle East into even more conflicts and tensions. For General Walker, a Russia, even weakened after so many years of war, will obtain from this axis of countries the means for what the British officer called Russian revenge against Europe. But what are England and Europe actually doing to face this threat? According to the British officer, the only way to face this threat is through the expansion and modernization of European forces. The British Armed Forces, which a few decades ago were among the largest and most modern in the world, continue to be very modern and professional, but in numerical terms, they represent only a small fraction of what they once were. In total, divided between its 3 branches, the British maintain a force of less than 140,000 soldiers, with the army having only 75,000 personnel and a volunteer reserve force of just over 25,000 soldiers. When we compare these numbers with the forces that the Russians and Ukrainians are operating on the battlefield, numbers that are around 1.2 million soldiers, we see how much the British are behind in numerical terms. In the Navy, exactly the same is true with the Royal Navy, which only a century ago was the largest and most powerful navy in the world, currently operating only 6 destroyers. Exactly the same number of new destroyers that China launches into the sea every year. This reduction in British assets is a process that began in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union. With the end of the Soviet threat, successive British governments encountered strong resistance to maintaining large armed forces, resulting in a progressive reduction in assets, which led to a situation classified by General Walker as potentially catastrophic. Since 2022, 31 years after the end of the Soviet threat, Russia has once again emerged as a major and powerful threat to Europe, a threat that, according to the British officer, must be faced with more assets capable of deterring any Russian attack in the future, with an investment of 2.3% of GDP in defense, which translates into £56 billion, the equivalent of $72 billion. The United Kingdom has very modern and well-equipped forces in all its branches. But as I mentioned at the beginning, there is a lack of volume, even in a context of shared defense in the NATO tradition, with some European countries rushing to get around this major and important negative aspect, especially Poland. As I mentioned in a recent video here on the channel, Poland currently has the largest European army and the 3rd largest in NATO, with 215,000 soldiers, behind only the United States with 1.3 million soldiers and Turkey with 450,000 troops. But the Poles want more, with the government's project aiming to reach a total force of 300,000 soldiers. An impressive number, especially when we consider that in 2014, just 10 years ago, Poland had less than 100,000 soldiers in active service. And beyond the numbers, Poland is investing in the modernization of its assets, acquiring advanced equipment, vehicles and aircraft, such as the F-35, state-of-the-art South Korean armored vehicles and howitzers, and the M1A2 Abrams CPV-3 armored vehicles, the most modern version of the American armored vehicle. The Poles' motivation is the same as that of the United Kingdom: to create armed forces strong enough to dissuade Vladimir Putin from attacking in the future, or, in the extreme, if Putin attacks, to be able to defend themselves. Counting, of course, with the support of the other 31 members of the alliance. In Germany, since 2022, Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been implementing measures to combat the low level of readiness of its forces. And in the nuclear field, the French and the British, the two nuclear powers on the continent, are investing heavily in the modernization of their nuclear deterrence. For centuries, since the end of the Roman Empire, the European continent has been seen as a veritable powder keg, with kingdoms, empires and countries fiercely degrading each other over control of resources, trade, or simply as a result of irreconcilable historical differences. But thanks to organizations such as NATO and the European Union, this long phase of terrible internal conflicts has passed. Indeed, since the end of the Second World War in 1945, no conflict has been recorded in Central and Western Europe. But since 2022, with the large-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin has threatened to break this tradition of peace, a threat reinforced by the axis referred to by the British officer that has united, under the same intention, countries that are showing themselves to be deeply hostile to Europe. We have known for thousands of years that the only way to avoid conflict is through a show of force. When a country shows weakness, predatory nations, governed by leaders imbued with a strong desire for expansion, will inevitably try to exploit this weakness through attacks. This happened in Ukraine in 2014 and in 2022, and this is what England and Europe as a whole want to prevent from happening to them in the future. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any news.